I started my career as a teacher. I think that working to scale up the direct delivery program for education brings together basically everything I've ever done in my career.
Thanks for tuning in to the Affecting Our Altruism podcast. This independent podcast is about people inspired to maximize their positive impact in the world. Each of them are walking their ideals through action. My featured guest today is Ilana Kessler, co-founder of Learning Alliance, an NGO focused on improving early grades literacy by scaling up an evidence-based intervention called structured pedagogy. Ilana started her career as an elementary school teacher, then got a master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's been working in global development for 13 years, focusing on leading innovation and experimentation to improve the impact, scalability, and cost-effectiveness of evidence-based programs in Africa and Asia. She's lived in Kenya, Ghana, and Tanzania. Learning Alliance, launching in Eastern Uganda this coming January, is what Ilana and her co-founder, Sofia Martinez-Galvez, launched coming out of the ambitious Impact Charity Entrepreneurship Incubation Program. It's so exciting to see this become a reality. Oh, and since we recorded this, we've gotten a little bit of update. You'll hear in the conversation that the expected impact will touch 5,000 students this year in Eastern Uganda. In fact, there's been so much interest that it'll be more like 15,000 young people who will be supported by this program. It's really exciting. If you're someone interested in maximizing your positive impact, my coaching is focused on helping people like you realize your potential. I've got a couple slots available at the moment, but more about that later after the interview. I think you're going to love this. Go check it out. Ilana, welcome to the Affecting Our Altruism podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Really looking forward to talking about education and some amazing projects you're working on. You went through the AIM, Ambitious Impact, a charity entrepreneurship incubation program. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell me about it?
I was in the cohort that finished the program in March 2024. Mm-hmm. It's a 2-month-long program. First, there's a multi-month application process. Mm-hmm. So, several rounds of interviews. I was impressed during the application process at the type of questions they asked, and it made me feel like they were going to get a strong set of potential co-founders, which is important because one of the aspects of the program is finding a potential co-founder for your charity. Mm-hmm. I think the other aspects of the program are matching with an idea. AIM does the research. They have a research team that identifies lots of different potential high-impact ideas that could be ultra cost-effective and ultra scalable in both global health and development and animal welfare, and that they have space for a new charity to come in and really make a big impact pretty quickly. Our cohort had maybe 8 or 9 different ideas for charities that we could start. We had 17 people who were considering starting a charity over the course of the program. It's 2 months of doing different projects to get to know the ideas, to get to know the other potential co-founders, and then eventually it sort of culminates in pairing with a co-founder and an idea, and then pitching the seed funding network. In April, my co-founder Sophia and I pitched this idea for Learning Alliance, and we received about $170,000 from the seed funding network, which is a phenomenal way to get started. We have this whole community of people, both our cohort and also people who have founded previously, people who are sort of founding next, people who are researchers, people who are implementers, people who are interested in funding. So I think being part of that whole ecosystem of people who are really excited to, it's not like I'm doing a commercial for them. They are constantly looking for people to join their program. So if this sounds exciting, people should for sure join. For me personally, I had worked for a long time in global development and in entrepreneurial roles. I was interested in starting my own thing, but I felt like I was missing was sort of like that piece of how do I get community, how do I get someone to work with, and where do I get some basic funding and like match with a good idea. So I feel like they really gave me all that. And then once we actually decided to launch Learning Alliance and got our seed funding, then we took some more time to go back to those initial things we've worked through and sort of build out our documents, talk to more stakeholders. We got on calls with, I want to say probably like 40 or so experts who work in structured pedagogy or other sort of similar sort of types of topics.
Wow. That's I was aghast at 22 one-on-ones at EAG. It's 40 odd talks with people experienced in that field that you're looking to implement. Sounds like a really deep dive.
Yeah, honestly, I was impressed and like heartened by how easy it was to get people to talk to us. Just even like reaching out to people who I saw leading lights in this field and saying, hey, we're interested in starting up a new organization that could take the evidence base around structured pedagogy and could scale it in some places where it hasn't been scaled. And almost everybody we reached out to said, yeah, I'd love to talk to you, I'd love to help. I found it to be really a friendly field, which is fantastic.
What are some things you learned from that experience?
What was interesting was it helped us narrow down what worked for them, digging deep into the questions of not just what should we do, but how should we do it, and also trying to get a feel for which country should we go to, where is there sort of space to do more of this, what worked and what didn't, and
Yeah, wow. It does seem like a really comprehensive experience.
Yeah.
First participant. Is it okay if we go back in time a little bit?
Sure.
And hear a little bit about the moments that made you into the person who got into and completed that program? You started off as a teacher, right?
I started my career as a 5th grade teacher. I was in a program called Teach for America, which is part of a global network of organizations. If I flash forward to 2 months ago, we just hired a bunch of teacher coaches in Uganda who were in Teach for Uganda, the counterpart to Teach for America. I taught 5th grade for 3 years outside of Phoenix. That was its own really hard job. I'm very proud of the work we did at my school. There were a lot of Teach for America teachers. There were a lot of other more traditional teachers. It was a school that had been facing a lot of challenges at the time that I started, and I saw the power of the new leadership, a new administration came in. I think they really brought teachers together. There were a lot of teachers who really cared about improving the school, and the school actually did a very positive turnaround during the time I was there in terms of performance on the state tests, in terms of the environment of the school. And even though my long-term plan was always to go into global development work rather than doing U.S. domestic education work, I learned a lot of useful skills about the basics of teaching, but also the role that leadership can play in bringing people together and bending the curve on what's possible in terms of impact.
You then, is it correct, am I getting your bigger narrative correct, that you then went on to work in global development?
Yeah, so I went and got a master's degree. I got an MPP at Harvard Kennedy School, and that was my pivot point. So from there, I got a job with an organization called One Acre Fund, which is a social enterprise that works in agriculture, and I became their pilot director for Ghana. So I moved to rural Ghana for 2 years and was sort of leading this agriculture social enterprise. And then later I moved to rural Kenya for 5 years and launched and led a team called Scale Innovations that focused on how to take the program model and make it more cost effective, more scalable, ensure that we were retaining impact while growing the program. And so how do you boil down the program model to its best version? The organization was scaling very, very quickly. So they rapidly became the largest agriculture organization in East Africa, being able to be part of that very rapid scale and very rapid growth while really focusing on, I think people often think about impact reducing as an organization scales, but our focus was increasing the impact per farmer as we scaled. I learned an enormous amount in that job and got a chance to lead a team that did experiments on the program model to deliver maximum cost effectiveness.
What were the outcomes, the intended outcomes of that agricultural?
They run a number of different sort of program models, but the core program model, which was the focus area while I was there, was to help farmers increase the profits from their farm, which is a combination of, typically it means growing more, maybe losing less of your stored maize to post-harvest loss, that kind of thing, and then making sure that any additional inputs you're using on your farm more than pay for themselves.
So what did you do after working with One Acre Fund?
Yeah, I was living in Ghana and Kenya for a total of 7 years. And then in 2018, I decided to move back to the US, which is just to be closer to home. And I held a few different roles with the sort of scaling up of evidence-based interventions in organizations that had been started by development economists and came out of that space. So I worked with Evidence Action, which scales a lot of evidence-based work within global health and some other development interventions. And then with Precision Development, which does digital agriculture work. So it takes some of the evidence around how to use phone-based extension work for farmers, and then how to use that to help them improve their yields and their profits on their farms through advice that they're able to receive on their phones. And in both cases, the goal of those organizations was there's this large evidence base from RCTs that's been run that sort of shows what are cost-effective and scalable things. that should be run, and then organizations that were taking that and trying to implement that at very large scale, in some cases in partnership with governments.
Yeah. What were some of your things you learned in that period? In this stage of your life?
It was an interesting move from when I was at One Acre Fund. I learned a lot about how to do sort of direct service delivery at scale. And here there was a lot of focus on how to take the evidence and how to understand, not just like reading a single RCT result and reading one paper, but understanding the body of evidence and how to implement that, often in partnership with government. So I learned things about working with governments. I learned things about ongoing use of A/B tests and partnership with economists, and how to the way that researchers can think about these types of problems.
Yeah. And so my impression is that you weren't necessarily doing the research, you were implementing these things.
Yeah,
You're putting them into practice.
Yeah.
Rather. And during that time, you have to still collect data about what you're doing and so forth. How is it different then, implementation from research? Because then people learn from your implementations, right?
Right, and in fact, those organizations worked with researchers, so in addition to implementing at scale, they were also simultaneously running experiments within those programs, both in order to improve on the impact that those programs had, as well as to sort of additional sort of general knowledge about human behavior that could be shared out in the broader